I really love our first reading from the Acts of the Apostles, which centers on the character of Gamaliel. Gamaliel is one of the elders of the Pharisees and a well-respected man. Also, by the way, he happens to be the teacher of St. Paul when St. Paul was being brought up in the Jewish faith. And he comes before the Sanhedrin and offers his advice. Now, St. Luke, who wrote both the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles, he records these words of Gamaliel, and of course they were meaningful to the Christian community for which St. Luke was writing in the year 100 or so. But I think these words are even more meaningful to us who are present-day Christians living 2,000 years after Jesus was alive. Gamaliel, talking to the Sanhedrin, says, think about these leaders that cropped up and they had many followers come. But then when that leader died, that group just dispersed and that became a closed chapter of history. And so Gamaliel tells the Sanhedrin, let these disciples alone. And he says, for if this endeavor or this activity is of human origin, it will destroy itself. But if it comes from God, you will not be able to destroy them. You may even find yourselves fighting against God. Think about all of the human institutions that have existed since Jesus' time, these 2,000 years. How maybe there were nations or businesses, how they might have cropped up at some point and seemed so strong. And the people of those days might have thought, oh gosh, this will never fall, this will never topple. And yet now, in history, that chapter of the book was closed at some point. Those institutions went away. They were human institutions, and so they were destroyed. But then, think about one institution that has continued since Jesus' time, the Catholic Church, the church established by Jesus Christ, which over 2,000 years later is still alive and well. That's remarkable. If this were a human institution, simply a human institution, it would have been destroyed, like Gamaliel was saying. And yet it continues to this very day. And that is great evidence, great proof that this is God's work, not man's work. And so it continues even to this day. And think too, in the history of the church, how many times there would have been that the church could have just stopped. So many scandals in the life of the church, some in which we're familiar with in our present day, sadly, but also many times in the past history of the church too, where everything seemed to be going wrong, leadership was corrupt, and all of those sorts of things. And yet, in spite of all of that, the church continues today. That is remarkable. It's proof of the Holy Spirit. That's the confirmation of what Jesus said to his disciples, to Peter, that the gates of the netherworld will not prevail against this church. And I think that does two things for us. One, it can give us confidence in the church that we're a part of, the Catholic Church that Jesus established, that it continues today. And so we can have confidence the Holy Spirit is still guiding it. And I think more generically then, when we see that promise of Jesus was fulfilled, that can give us confidence too in Jesus' other promises, that they'll be fulfilled in our life, that the Holy Spirit will come upon us, that he will be with us in our times of difficulty, that he died and that he came to seek and save the lost and wants to raise us up to heaven. All of these promises that Jesus makes, we can have confidence because we see the evidence of his work in this way that the church continues to this present day too. And so as we see the church continuing today, we know that it's God's work. And as we see Jesus' promises fulfilled, that can give us confidence in the church that Jesus established, as well as in God's own activity in our own lives.